The airport was loud that morning. Flights were being called out over the speakers, people were dragging suitcases across the shiny floors, and coffee shops had long lines of tired travelers. It was the kind of busy that made everyone look stressed and in a hurry. Nobody had time to slow down. Nobody had patience for anything that got in their way. Commander Rachel Donovan moved her wheelchair through the crowd with the calm and steady focus of someone who had learned long ago to block out the noise. She was 41 years old, with short dark hair that had a few threads of silver near her temples. Her jaw was strong, her back was straight, and her brown eyes moved around the terminal with the quiet attention of someone trained to notice everything. She wore simple civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain gray hoodie, and a worn pair of running shoes. Nothing about her appearance said military. That was the point. She had been traveling for nearly 19 hours. The mission debrief in Germany had gone 3 hours longer than expected. Then the flight out of Frankfurt had been delayed by weather. Then a connecting flight in London had boarded late and landed even later. By the time she reached this airport on American soil, her body was running on almost no sleep, and her lower back was aching in a way that reminded her exactly why she was in the wheelchair to begin with. The injury had happened 14 months ago. A training accident during a high-altitude water extraction exercise. The kind of thing that was not supposed to happen to someone with her level of experience. But it had. A misjudged angle on impact. A vertebra compressed in a way that the surgeons described as severe, but manageable. 2 surgeries later, she could walk short distances, but anything longer than about 100 meters brought on a level of pain that made it impossible to function. The wheelchair was not permanent. That was what her doctors kept telling her. With continued physical therapy and careful management, full mobility was expected. But for now, for travel, for long stretches of standing and walking, the chair was necessary. She had made peace with it. Or at least, she had told herself she had. The truth was more complicated. Rachel Donovan had spent 22 years doing things that most people could not imagine. She had led underwater demolition teams. She had parachuted into hostile territory in complete darkness. She had trained soldiers from 6 different countries. She had been the kind of person that other highly trained people looked to when things got extremely dangerous and extremely complicated. And now she sat in a chair that strangers held doors open for, spoke to in slow, careful voices, and looked at with expressions that she had come to recognize instantly. The mixture of pity and discomfort that people showed when they did not know what to say. She was almost at her gate. The terminal was crowded, and the path between people and their bags was narrow. She navigated carefully, threading through gaps, keeping her pace steady. She was about 20 feet from the gate entrance when she first noticed the group. There were 4 of them. Young men, college-aged, traveling together with the loud, easy confidence of people who had never once had to think about how much space they were taking up. They were sprawled across the main walkway, bags dropped across the floor, legs stretched out, laughing at something on one of their phones. They were not at her gate. They were simply blocking the path to it. Rachel slowed her chair. She said, calmly and clearly, "Excuse me, could you let me through?" The one closest to her looked up. He was tall, wearing a university sweatshirt, and he had the look of someone who had just been mildly interrupted from something much more important. He glanced down at her, then back at his friends, then made a small theatrical gesture with his hand, not moving himself, but waving at her as if she were a minor inconvenience to be brushed past. "Yeah? Yeah," he said, not moving at all. She waited. Nobody moved. "I need you to move your bags," she said again. Still calm. Still even. The second young man, who had been lying back against his duffel bag, sat up slightly and looked at her with a flat, uninterested expression. "Go around," he said. There was no around. The walkway was flanked on one side by a row of seats and on the other by a temporary construction partition. The bags were directly across the only path forward. Rachel looked at the bags, then at the young men, then at the bags again. She had a long internal conversation with herself in about 3 seconds. She thought about how tired she was. She thought about the 19 hours of travel and the 2 surgeries and the mission that had just ended and the debrief that had run 3 hours over. She thought about the 14 months of physical therapy and the slow, frustrating grind of recovering from something that should not have happened. She thought about all the small moments in airports and restaurants and sidewalks over the last year where someone had looked through her or spoken over her or treated her as if the chair meant she was also invisible. And then she moved. forward and pushed the nearest bag aside with the footrest of her wheelchair. The reaction was immediate. The young man in the university sweatshirt stood up. He was not small. He was a few inches over 6 feet and had the kind of build that came from years of lifting weights in a university gym. He looked down at her with an expression that had moved from annoyance into something colder. "Did you just push my bag?" he said. "You weren't moving it," she said. What happened next was something that Rachel would later describe, in the plain language she always used for incident reports, as escalating without sufficient provocation. The young man reached out and grabbed the handle of her wheelchair, not with force, but with the kind of casual authority that comes from someone who has never once imagined that grabbing someone's mobility equipment might be a serious mistake, and pulled it sideways, angling her away from the path. "Move aside," he said. And then, looking at his friends with a small smile, he added, "Feeble one." His friends laughed. The gate attendant at the nearby desk had looked up. A few travelers nearby had turned to watch. An older woman seated in the row of chairs along the wall had pressed her lips together in an expression of clear discomfort. Rachel did not say anything. She put her hands on the wheels of the chair, straightened her path, and looked up at the young man with an expression that several people who had worked with her over the years would have recognized immediately. It was not anger. It was not hurt. It was a very particular kind of stillness, the kind that comes from complete control. "Take your hand off my chair," she said quietly. He did not. What happened in the next 45 seconds would be described differently by everyone who witnessed it. The gate attendant would later say she had never seen anything move so fast. The older woman against the wall would tell her daughter about it for weeks afterward. One of the young men, the one who had been on his phone, would go quiet and stay quiet for a very long time. Rachel Donovan had not used her full range of upper body training in 14 months. The injury had taken her legs, partially and temporarily, but her arms, her core, her reaction time, her 22 years of muscle memory, those were entirely intact. In the time it took most people to register that something was happening, she had removed the young man's hand from her wheelchair with a controlled wrist lock, stood briefly on her feet, just long enough. Just enough to make her point. He locked eyes with him from a height that suddenly made the gap between them feel much smaller than it had a moment ago, and then returned to her seated position with the deliberate calm of someone who had decided exactly how much force was appropriate and used precisely that amount, and no more. The young man stumbled back. He was not injured, but he was breathing differently. His face had changed completely. Nobody laughed this time. Rachel straightened the front of her hoodie. She looked at the four of them. Then she looked at the bags still on the floor. "Move them," she said. They moved them. She wheeled forward to her gate. The gate attendant, a woman in her 50s with a name tag that said Diane, watched her approach with wide eyes. "Ma'am," Diane said carefully. Do you need me to call someone?" "I'm fine," Rachel said. "I just need to board." Diane looked at the boarding pass Rachel handed her. She looked at the name. She looked at the designation codes beside it that indicated military priority and medical accommodation. Her expression shifted into something that was trying very hard not to show how much it was shifting. "Of course," Diane said. "Right away." "And I'm sorry about those." "It's handled," Rachel said simply. She boarded the plane. She found her seat, folded the wheelchair, and stored it. She put her small bag in the overhead compartment, sat down, buckled her belt, and closed her eyes. Outside at the gate, the four young men had not moved from where they were standing. They were looking at each other. One of them was looking down at the floor. The one in the university sweatshirt was rubbing his wrist with a thoughtful expression. None of them were laughing anymore, but the incident was far from over, because Diane had not stopped watching. And Diane had noticed the name on the boarding pass. And Diane had a brother who had spent 12 years in the Navy. And Diane, with the specific kind of curiosity that certain people carry with them through a lifetime of watching people pass through airports, was already reaching for her phone. Diane Moretti had worked at the airport for 16 years. She had seen a lot of things. She had seen a man propose marriage at the gate only to be told no loudly in front of 60 waiting passengers. She had seen a grandmother smuggling 14 live goldfish in her carry-on. She had seen business travelers have complete emotional collapses over middle seats and retired teachers who somehow always got upgraded to first class without asking. She had seen more human behavior compressed into small moments than most people encountered in a lifetime. But she had never seen anything quite like what she had just Witnessed at Gate 3 for B, she sat at her desk and turned the boarding pass information over in her mind. She had glimpsed the name clearly, Commander Rachel A. Donovan, and beside it the military designation codes that she recognized from the years her brother Marcus had served. The codes did not say much. They were administrative markers. But the word commander and the branch markers were enough to make her pause. She thought about the way the woman had moved. The speed of it. The complete absence of panic or anger. The precise, almost mechanical efficiency of removing a hand from her chair, and then the brief, devastating moment of standing, just long enough, just enough, before sitting back down, as if nothing had happened. Diane had processed thousands of passengers in her career. She had seen soldiers, veterans, athletes, performers of every description. She had never seen anyone move like that. She reached for her phone and sent a text to her brother Marcus, who worked as a security contractor now and still kept close ties with people in the military community. She typed, "Marcus, does the name Commander Rachel Donovan mean anything in the Navy? SEAL or Special Operations, maybe?" His response came for minutes later. It was a single line. "Where did you see that name?" She replied, "Airport. She was just here." Something happened. Another pause. Then, "Give me a few minutes." Diane went back to managing the gate. The plane had already boarded. The jetway was sealed. She was processing the last of the standby passengers for a different flight when her phone buzzed again. Marcus had sent her a longer message this time. She read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on her desk and sat very still for a moment. Rachel Donovan had no idea any of this was happening. She was 30,000 feet in the air with her eyes closed, doing the breathing exercises her physical therapist had given her for long flights. The exercises were meant to manage circulation and reduce the stiffness that came from sitting too long in a fixed position. She had been doing them automatically for so long that they no longer required conscious thought. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. She was thinking about the debrief in Germany, about the specifics of the operation that had concluded 4 days earlier, a training coordination mission with NATO Special Forces units that had involved 6 countries, 3 languages, and a planning structure that had taken 11 months to build. She had led the American coordination team. The mission had gone well. Not perfectly, nothing ever went perfectly, but the objectives had been met and the partnerships had been strengthened in ways that would matter for years. What she was less sure about was what came next for her. The injury had forced her into a coordination role for the last 14 months. She had been good at it. She had always been good at anything she committed herself to. But she was a field operator at her core, and 14 months behind a desk and in planning rooms had done something to her that she could not quite name. It was not depression. She had been evaluated for that, and it was not what she was carrying. It was something closer to a specific kind of hunger. The feeling of a person who was very good at a thing and had been kept from doing it for a long time. Her orthopedic surgeon had told her at the last appointment that the recovery was progressing better than initially projected. There was a possibility, not a certainty, but a real possibility, that with another 4 to 6 months of focused rehabilitation, she might be cleared for limited field assessment. That was not a return to full active operations. But it was a door opening, even if only slightly. She was thinking about that door when the plane hit a pocket of turbulence and she opened her eyes. The flight was uneventful after that. She landed, collected her chair from the jetway attendant, who was professionally courteous in the way that suggested she had been briefed to be careful with that particular item, and made her way through the terminal to the ground transportation area. A car was waiting for her. The driver was a young man from the base motor pool who knew enough to say nothing beyond the necessary greeting. She was almost home. Or what passed for home, the quarters on base where she had lived for the last 8 years. A set of rooms that were functional and sparse and exactly the way she had arranged them, but at the same time. Back at the airport, something was already moving. One of the 4 young men, not the one in the university sweatshirt, not the one who had been lying on his duffel bag, but the quiet one. The one who had been on his phone when everything started, had been recording. He had started filming